This episode of UK Low Carb Podcast is sponsored by Deliciously Guilt-Free. Enjoy the show.
Hi guys, welcome to another episode of UK Low Carb. It's great to have you join us. I know that many of you have really enjoyed the first episode and you're desperate to hear the second part, so I won't talk for too long because I know you want to hear what Professor Tim Noakes has to say. But just for those who are new, this is UK Low Carb. I'm your host Dan Grief, and I'm trying to help build a grassroots movement for change so that we can build the low carb way of life as an established fact in people's lives that they think that they can try for themselves. And the more that we share these N=1 stories from people who have actually had amazing results. I mean, some of the people on this show include those who have put their type 2 diabetes into remission. They've reversed their obesity. They've, more importantly, regained their lives again and been able to spend time with their family, to play football with their children, their grandchildren, whatever it might be. They've just had a new lease of life because of this way of eating. And I want to get that message out. So, like I said, this episode is part 2 with Professor Tim Noakes. So in part 2, we actually did play a game of Devil's Advocate. And also we get to probably the most important part of the whole recording, which is the questions that you have sent in on the UK Low Carb Facebook group, which I then asked him directly to get some answers. So that's all coming in the show. I hope you enjoy it. Have a lovely weekend, and I will be back next week with another Graham Phillips episode on Tuesday, and also a really exciting show next week on Friday as well. So have a great weekend, guys, and I'll see you soon. Okay, he's feeling the pressure of Devil's Advocate, the game show where, you know, we've had people passing out with the excitement. No, I joke. So, okay, I've got here then, Tim, for you 5 statements. Actually, that's a lie. I've got 4. I've just counted them. So it's going well so far. I've got 4 statements. And these are my Devil's Advocate statements that you are, you know, more than entitled to agree with them or disagree with them, as long as I get your reason as to why you agree or disagree. So you can either say right or wrong and then what you think. Okay?
Yeah.
Right. The first one is as follows. Doctors establish patient-doctor relationships over social media.
That is false.
Okay. Why is that false, Tim?
And it's
what
false
do you know about
because
this?
you have to be able to examine the patient to get a doctor-patient relationship. You have to see the patient face to face to have a doctor-patient relationship. So that would be our argument. Our argument in the trial was that I was simply answering a we question. So that was made it okay. If you answer an I question, then it's a problem. So if it's for me, I was talking about in general. So that if you're talking in general, so one of the reasons that came through in my trial was the Health Profession Council wanted to control Twitter as well. If I'd lost my case on the grounds that I had got into a doctor-patient relationship by answering a we question, what that meant that no doctor in South Africa could ever again speak publicly or write a book in which they gave general advice, because that would now be said to be developing a doctor-patient relationship.
Oh my goodness, I never thought of that. What a simple but effective argument. That's so true.
That's what they were looking for. Because if they could then do that to me, they could do it to anyone. So for example, let's say you said COVID-19, blah, 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 something, and you said something which is against government policy. That's it. Your medical degree is gone. You can't practice medicine anymore. That's what would have happened. And the pressure to be conformed to the COVID-19 messaging is so powerful that they would have used it. They would have used that. And they would have shut down any debate about COVID in this country.
Do you ever think that the states with its kind of, I know you've got a codified constitution as well, with its Bill of Rights in America, everyone in the states knows their Bill of Rights and they know what their individual rights are. In Britain, with common law and statute law, we're much more nebulous about this stuff sometimes, aren't we? But I think what you've just told me there is that, I don't know about South Africa, you can answer that in a minute, but I sometimes worry that we could fall into a situation where we lose some significant rights there, which in America, I don't think they'd let that happen so easily, would they? They'd fight against that. So in South Africa, is it the same as America, or do you think it's a bit more like the UK where these things aren't actually so well defended?
No, I think it's like America. I think the constitutional rights are very firm here. And that was one of the reasons why my senior counsel decided to defend me, because he said this is a question of your constitutional rights, which were abused all along the way.
And actually, like you said, when it's written down, you can defend yourself. We haven't got it codified, so people don't understand this stuff. Okay, so the first one, you've said that's false about the doctor relationship. Right, number 2, might change your mind. Who knows? Maybe we'll go for true. Carbs are essential to high-performance athletes.
Absolutely nonsense. Not true.
Would you have always said
Completely wrong.
that? Would you have always said that?
No. Up till December the 12th, 2010, I would have said the opposite. But it's so funny because I was asked to write a rebuttal to a story about low carbs and high carbs and what's better for performance. And it was developed by a person I know very, very well and who I've argued with for 20 years. And eventually they wouldn't publish it because they said it's too personal. You become too personal attacking this particular scientist, which was not true. All I said was that this particular scientist said this. And now she says this, and she's changed her mind. And on what evidence, what basis did she change her mind? And so that was the Journal of Physiology wrote to me and said, no, you're too personal. We can't publish this. The reality was that the evidence is so absolutely clear that there's no benefit to a high carbohydrate diet for 99.9% of all athletes. I accept there might be a small percentage. I mean, maybe Eliud Kipchoge might not have beaten the world record if he was eating a high-fat diet. He wouldn't be a marathon runner, a sub-2-hour marathon runner. Maybe there are some athletes who are highly insulin sensitive and who can benefit from high carbohydrate diets. But there are too many athletes who don't benefit from that. And there are some elite athletes who don't benefit. So if you're insulin resistant, I don't believe that carbohydrates are going to help you because they'll affect your training, they'll affect your recovery, etc. And so, but that's not included in these analyses. They don't look at that. They don't look at what happens to an athlete over a season. They just look at, they put them, this is what we used to do. We used to put people in a laboratory and feed them carbs one week and then another fat. What does that tell you? It doesn't tell you anything. Yeah. Because it's such short duration and you don't know how could the athlete train. And all I know is that the elite athletes I've worked with say, I recover much more quickly. I personally recover much more quickly on this diet. So I accept that. By the way, Phil Mickelson won the PGA at 50 on this last weekend.
Oh, wow. And doing it on low
carb. He started fasting this past year and lost about 20 pounds of weight. He's completely changed his profile. And he did a 36-hour fast going into this competition.
Wow. Yeah. And yet I go to the gym and they tell me, have you eaten this morning? And I say no. And then they're like, you need to have your breakfast cereal or your porridge. And I'm like, I don't actually, it's very weird, the mindset, isn't it? But then on saying that, Tim, how much carbohydrate energy is in our bodies on a Western diet compared to how much fat is in our bodies? Just in terms of the actual amount, surely there must be way more fat for fat oxidation than there is, glyceride and all the rest of it.
You've got about 2 hours if you run on carbs, about 2 hours, that's about it. Whereas for fat, you've got 4 or 5 days, you've got weeks on fat.
So when you were studying that's weird. So you were studying this small fuel tank and thinking you've got to keep having gels and things as you're running to keep this little fuel tank. And there's a massive fuel tank next to it you weren't even looking at.
Yeah. Now I now have a talk in which I say, we were obviously trying to suppress all fat oxidation, but yet the way you save carbohydrates is by burning fat. So we had this problem in the head. And why was it? Because we were getting our funding from the sugar industry and the carbohydrate industry. So we knew that if we could prove carbohydrates work, we'd have funding for the rest of our lives. So
wow.
That's what we knew.
You wouldn't be on this podcast though, so I think you've won.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so far there's been 2 falses. Okay, let's go for the 4th one then. It's the calories, stupid. That is the key to a healthy life.
Yeah, that's all nonsense as well. Yeah, so that has caused. By the way, you're talking about Gary, and I've just been reading his. This is not his most recent book, The Case Against Sugar.
Oh, that's one of my favorite books.
But he's
of all
such
time.
a brilliant writer, and I know you know that. But this book came out during my trial, and so I didn't have a chance to really read it at length. But then I was sent this book, Ravenous, which is another fabulous book, which has just been released yesterday. And this guy argues, Sam Apple makes the key argument that it's fructose in the diet that's the problem. And he gets to it from looking at reviewing Otto Warburg, who's another genius. So I decided I better go back and read Gary's book, and just a fabulous book, this, and makes me realize that that fructose is probably a very key component of our ill health. And so what he says is that it's not the calories drives everything, because he says the reason why we don't debate sugar is, oh, well, you see, it's the calories and you get fat and then you get diabetic. But it might not be that. It might be the fructose that makes you diabetic, insulin resistant, and diabetic. And it's not, and that you have to remove the carbohydrates to reverse the condition. So that's why they drive the calorie story. He describes it absolutely brilliantly.
Yeah, and
they
that's
drive
the
it because then they can defend sugar.
Yeah,
and they can defend every single product. Now, so you see, you're just overeating in general. So how can you isolate it to one product?
Yeah, totally agree. But then also, I know that you said obesity is a brain disorder, and I love what you said about hunger is actually the reason that there's an obesity crisis, which what I think is so cruel is people get told, it's your fecklessness, your greed, your lack of control. That's why you have the problems you do. But actually the root cause is actually people are starving hungry and they're eating this snack, the snacks, the terrible food, feeling hungrier by the time and putting weight on. And it's not their fault. They're actually victims of the food system, aren't they?
Yeah. And I mean, you have to go through it yourself to know that. I mean, I was a victim to that. And that's why I was fat and obese and getting more lazy, because I couldn't control the food that I was eating. And as soon as within 2 days, all my hunger disappeared and I had no more food cravings. And I've gone 11 years now like that. It's just been absolutely amazing. And as long as you stay away from those addictive foods, the highly ultra processed foods, you're fine, as you know.
So that book purchase in December 2010 was probably the biggest thing that changed your life ever, was probably purchasing that book, right? You might not even be here right now.
I wouldn't be here. I truly believe, or if I would have lost both legs by now and so on.
Oh my word, that's an awful thought. Okay, the last one. Now, it's been false every time here. You never know. This last devil's advocate you might go for, although I suspect not. But we'll go for it anyway. Okay, Tim? No one needs to eat meat. We can thrive on a raw, non-processed, plant-based diet. Now, there's so much. I wrote that particularly because there's a lot there we can expand on. The raw, non-processed, plant-based diet. Can any human survive on that?
No humans have ever survived on that diet. So if you took it out away from the industrial diet, you couldn't. So you can only survive now because you've got industrial processed foods like vegetable oils, which can give you some fat, and other processed things like whey protein and pea protein, which can help you. But no, you can't. You have to have animal produce if you're eating a proper raw food diet. You have to have animal produce in it.
Yeah. So
you're not going to survive long on that diet, or if you do, you're going to be very, very sick in the long term.
But that's the argument that's being made, isn't it? People are making that argument. If you look at animals who, eat vegetables, they're not the ones, a bit like the antelope, who are running hours and hours a day. Isn't it like a chimpanzee does hunt for meat, but it can't do more than 20 minutes because it hasn't got the reserves, because it's eating a plant-based diet. So it has to be sedentary, eating all day long. Whereas when I went to Zambia, and I remember seeing how the lions hunted, and also in Kenya, they eat every 48 hours. So there's a big burst of energy, which actually, that's another thing I suddenly realized. I know you said about this running to get your prey, it's a bit like cardio, but actually that big burst of energy is something that's really healthy for us. And I know you do CrossFit, which is all about big burst of energy, but also it's something that meat eaters and people who are fat adapted can do more easily, because they've got the energy there, the reserves, to put that energy in quickly for the hunt.
Absolutely correct. Yeah. So no, I agree with you completely. As you said, the chimpanzee, if you were a proper raw based diet, you'd be eating all day.
Yeah.
And you'd have such gut problems that you would really feel sick. You can only do it because the industrial diet allows you to concentrates the calories and allows you to eat less often.
And also your large intestine is far too small. I don't know if you ever saw, there's a very good program they had in the UK, and I know Richard Dawkins was part of it, and it was Inside Nature's Giants or something, and they opened up an elephant, and I couldn't believe how massive
Yeah.
the intestine was, because it is breaking down all the time these plant things. The human body just isn't like that at all, is it? So we've had 4 devil's advocates, and I just want to confirm that you've actually said that they're all false and rubbish. So that's good to hear. I think we'd be surprised if you went the other way on that one.
That's right.
Okay, so another section is that I have here some questions from the UK Low Carb Facebook community, and I'll pick some of these because I appreciate your time is precious, and that some of these are quite long. But the first one is from Nicola Locke. You might actually know her because
I remember Nicola well.
Yeah, excellent. So she'd be delighted to hear that you're going to answer her question. She says the following: I've heard recently that there could be a benefit in increasing protein and not going quite so high fat, particularly if weight plateaus. What is your opinion on this, please? And she says, I've heard him speak briefly about it, and he mentioned he was doing something and he's looking into it. And just before I let you answer, she also said, thank him for all the work he does. I'm a member of the Nutrition Network, which is part of the Noakes Foundation, and I've just enrolled in my 4th course, and it's a fabulous platform. That's nice, isn't it?
Thanks, Nicola. Yeah, indeed. So yes, I'm definitely reducing my fat and increasing the protein, and I haven't noticed that my satiety's got less, which is interesting. And so I've looked at the evidence, and I think the evidence is probably correct that we generally don't eat enough protein, and certainly at my age of 71 3/4, I think you need more protein and to keep you healthy. So I think that this is the new story that's going to come out. The funny thing is, Andreas Ehrenfeld, who's the great diet doctor who helped me a lot, a few months ago, he tweeted, I've just lost X kilograms and 2 centimeters around my waist. But despite being on a low carb diet for 25 years, what do you think I did? And there were all these answers on Twitter. And then I answered, I said, you've increased your protein intake to more than 40%. And you're probably doing CrossFit as well. So he said, you're right on the first one, you're wrong on the second one. And he's making a big story about he's increased his protein and he's lost some weight and he's feeling really good on it. Amazing. So that's really interesting because he's one of the drivers of the low carb story. Oh.
Can I tell you a little story? In August 2017, which I think coincided with the end of your case, didn't it?
That's correct. Yeah.
Because I was there in San Diego at the UK Low Carb USA conference, and they announced, and I didn't know if it was the appeal or the first case. I think it's the first case.
First case, yeah.
You had won, and there's a massive celebration. It's just a wonderful place to be to hear that news. It's incredible. Anyway, my flight was cancelled on the way back to the UK, and I thought, this isn't good. They put me on a BA flight, and I was really annoyed. And guess who my passenger next to me was? Is Andreas. I was so lucky. So we flew home together from California, and I just asked him question after question. And what a man. He's got to come on the podcast. Lovely guy. Right. The next question is from Tim Newton. And Tim, I believe, has met you. So let's just read what he says. He said,
yes, I know Tim well. He's a runner.
He's a runner, exactly. And
a very good runner.
He's 70 as well, I think. Yeah. He says, I'd love to hear what your current thinking is on optimum balance of carbs, fats, and proteins for endurance athletes, both running, training, and competition. Is it different for insulin-sensitive people like him or insulin-resistant people? Or is it a trial and error for each individual person? And how's the new edition of the Law of Running coming along? Has CrossFit changed his view of high-intensity training? He's got a bit more to say because these are your fans. So of course, they want to say a lot more than that, which is understandable. He says also, just to let him know that he wants to go to South Africa to run the Comrades, even though he's now turned 70. And apparently you gave him that target at the PHC conference.
That's right. So thanks, Tim, for those lovely questions. Yeah, I think it is. You've got to work it out for yourself. And if you're insulin resistant, it's clear you have to cut the carbs as low as possible. It doesn't matter how much running you're doing. It's not going to help. You can't outrun the bad effects of the carbs. So if you're carbohydrate intolerant, I think you have to get the carbs below 25 grams a day. Maybe you can go up to 50. But for long-term health, you need to give it below 50 grams. And then the balance is protein and fat. And the difference now is I think that the protein needs to be increased a bit. And so for protein, about 40% of calories, which is much higher than most people would suggest. And you could even go higher than that if you wanted to. The problem is that it's difficult to eat that diet because it does restrict you to chicken and fish, chicken breasts and fish and whey protein. It's not a great diet, but it can be done. So that's the first thing. So if you're insulin sensitive, I think you would see how much carbohydrate you need and stick with that. If you're insulin intolerant, then you've got to cut the carbs. I think the next question was,
He also asked you about the law of running. How's the new
yeah,
edition coming along?
I'm working on it. I'm about to start. I've just got a few more things to do on nutrition. But I'm starting collecting material, and I'm really excited because I'm going to completely rewrite the whole thing. I'm starting from scratch, as if I didn't know about the old book.
That's wonderful.
Not quite, but I'm absolutely. And if it doesn't have the stuff has longevity, it's not in there anymore. So, and I'm starting with the myths. That's what I want to start with. These are the myths.
Great.
We get rid of the myths, and then we go on to
You're
the
putting
modern
it all right.
physiology.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
Netta Gorman, you might not know, but she's got a podcast called Life After Sugar, and she's a really lovely person who I think you'll probably meet at some point. And she says, can you ask him what he thinks of the various food guides, the food pyramids, healthy plates, etc., around the world, and why they still exist? Especially since Brazil doesn't use a food guide at all. They basically say make natural or minimal processed foods the basis for your diet. Why don't other countries follow suit? That's an interesting question. So why the insistence?
They don't, because the International Life Sciences Institute controls the dietary guidelines in about 40 countries around the world. And ILSI is controlled by Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, and all the food giants. And they're terrified that we should start eating real foods rather than the highly processed, ultra-processed foods. And so they will always promote the ultra-processed foods which fit onto the plate.
Yeah.
And we'll never go back to the proper foods, the real foods that we promote. So that's the reason. Its industry is driving it.
It's very simple, unfortunately, isn't it?
They control the dietary guidelines, and they control the dietitians organizations throughout the world. The dietitians organizations will not survive unless they got Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola money and ILSI money. They won't survive.
See, I do worry a little bit about Aseem Malhotra because, the rate he's going, he's going to put himself out of a job because cardiologists one day won't be needed anymore. What will he do,
Oh, well, he'll do personal coaching, I think.
Yeah, I think that'd be better.
New thing.
Yeah.
Personal coaching is it's a real challenge to medicine. I mean, I think we discussed the problem with medicine is the burnout. And eventually patients are going to find health coaches. And Aseem would be a perfect health coach.
To live a happier, healthier life. Yeah. And deserves it. Okay, yeah. Sarah Cos says, could you ask him how he's eating himself at the moment? Apparently, she said she's seen you talk about the carnivore way of eating. Interested to hear about his experience of that and what has led him that way, which I think we've kind of covered a little bit, but
Sarah's quite right. I'm definitely more carnivorous. Because I've sort of lost interest in vegetables with time.
Yeah.
And it's easier to prepare foods without the vegetables. So I think that's part of the reason. So I don't eat. I used to think that vegetables were essential for nutrients and so on, but I'm not convinced about that, or the antioxidants and all those things. But the answer why you need antioxidants is if you've got a visceral obesity, that's what's causing inflammation. But if you don't have visceral obesity, your body's not inflamed. So why would you need all these other things?
No. True.
So that's the way I look at it. So yes, I'm definitely promoting more the carnivore diet and loving it and doing very well on it. And I've put on quite a lot of muscle since I started doing CrossFit, and I think in part that's also related to the carnivore diet.
But if you go back, 10,000 years ago, you and I, our ancestors might have been hanging out hunting mammoth. There was no chance whatsoever of getting fresh vegetables or fruit underneath ice, was there? So I just find that weird that we think that's essential for us to eat.
Yeah, particularly I'm from the north of England, as my parents said there. You couldn't grow anything there 10,000 years ago. It was ice. No. It was under ice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Actually, if you look at the map of England, do you know the River Thames was the edge of the ice sheet?
Was it?
Yeah. So if you actually look, so I'm from East Anglia, our landscape's completely flat because we would have been under a mile or so of ice here. Yeah. And of course, Liverpool, even further north, completely under ice. So, you'd have been living on top of that. There's no chance you'd have vegetables.
That's right.
Okay, just a couple more because I appreciate your time is precious. This is from Chris Rooney, great listener of the show. He says, hi, Dan, I'd like to understand more about your state of mind during the trial. And I know you did mention it a little bit, but I think it's only fair I ask the question. It must have been very stressful. Did you ever doubt yourself? And what was your coping strategy to deal with those low moments?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Actually, I never had any doubt because I had such an amazing team and we had such a lot of fun. So and also I can block out the stuff I don't like. I've got this ability.
Yeah.
And I always thought we're going to win it and this is the way we're going to do it. And my wife came to some of the trials. She said, this is disgusting what they're doing to you. But I didn't hear it. when they were really rude about me and were absolutely destructive of my character and personality and the work that I'd done, I just think I just sort of blocked it out. So that my coping strategy was to depend. It was as if I wasn't there.
Yeah.
And I just focused on the positive. And we had so much positive, and I had such an amazing team. And I think, Nina Teichold came to, and Zoe Harcom from Wales,
Two incredible
Karen
people
Zinn from New Zealand. We just had a great time. I mean, that sounds funny, but outside the courtroom, we were laughing and joking and really enjoying ourselves. And but it was terrible. The whole mood was, it was dirty. My wife said, this is just dirty. And the people were just offensive. The prosecution were just offensive in what they did and what they said. But I kind of just was above it. I just kind of listened above it. And were the low moments, actually, I can't remember any low moments. Even when I was cross-examined, I was so angry. So, the funny thing was that the prosecution, the head of the prosecution, went to my medical school, and he was a few years behind me. And then he did cardiac surgery, and he said, I can't earn enough money. So he went into law, you see. So, and anyway, at the end of the trial, he'd lost about 20 kilos.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, from stress, or surely not from low carb?
From
That'd
the
be amazing.
diet.
Oh my word!
Diet, yeah.
This is a revelation.
And he reversed his type 2 diabetes.
No wonder they wanted to appeal the case. That's incredible. You know what? I'd imagine in those moments, it's probably afterwards when you've got through it that that you must then reflect. And you said about the post-traumatic stress. I mean, sometimes in the moment, your brain just goes through survival mode. But when you're then reflecting, that's when your brain can really say, whoa, how have we got through this in one piece?
And the other interesting thing is that I think I took more stress outside the courtroom. Because if you ask my wife, she said, you were depressed and your face was a problem for me. She always thought something might happen to me because of what she could notice. I wasn't my usual happy, friendly self. And I think that was where I actually took the strain. When we actually got into court, it was like we prepared for this battle, and now we were in the battle. So in the moment, you were focused on the battle.
Yes.
But outside the courtroom, it was different. I had to prepare. One of the major errors they did was it went over 4 years, and I could prepare my case. If I'd had to stand up on day one and present my case, would have been a disaster.
Yeah.
But they gave me 2 years extra to prepare the case. And that was when I learned everything. I learned, of course, I knew quite a lot, but I learned a whole lot more.
Yeah, because you had to.
Presented in a manageable, understandable way.
Just out of interest, did they have expert witnesses? Because you had expert witnesses floating around the world, but did they?
Yeah, they had the most terrible witnesses because they couldn't get anyone in South Africa. So all they got were the conflicted people who were ill-seed, related to ill-seed. That's all they could find. Wow. Yeah, I know a lot of good people said, but he's right. We're not going to go against him.
Yeah. Well, there you go. So whereas you had people like Zoe Harcom flying over the rest, across the other side of the world to do your evidence, and Nina. I mean, exactly. Wow, what a set of people you had on your side. With that team, anyone could win anything, couldn't they?
Exactly. Really. And Nina was so funny because she was after me. She was the first person. So I'd been through the 3.5 days of cross-examination, and then Nina came along. And she presented for about probably half a day. And at the end, we expected, okay, now she's going to have to go through another half days of cross-examination. He asked her one question. He said, how long have you been in Cape Town? So she said, I've been here 3 days. When are you leaving back to US? Oh, tomorrow. Well, have a great trip because I haven't got any questions for you.
So you got a bit of tourism in as well. Fantastic.
Yeah, that's right.
That's incredible. Wow. I love that. Okay. We'll just take a couple more because I think we're kind of, there are so many questions here, but I'm going to go with Josie Moore firstly, and then Heidi Bannister. So Josie Moore says that she can't wait for this interview. She's very excited. I really like some advice on fueling for endurance, like marathon and long distance runs. I trained for my last ultra on low carb, but had some dreadful runs in training. So panicked the weeks before the event, and then I carb loaded. That's interesting. So she's kind of getting ready for the next set and doesn't want to do that again. She ate through event 2 and felt great, had a fab run, smashed my target, but feel bad for not having the confidence to run on low carb. I assumed I'd be fat adapted, but given the new few bad runs in training, I didn't want to take the risk. I'd love to know how to fuel healthily for my next challenge. Thank you. And that's for Josie.
So in general, I do promote the low carb diet for everyone. I think that most people will benefit, and particularly ultras, because the biology tells us that you have to benefit. The longer the race is, the lower the exercise intensity, the more fat's going to contribute to your performance. So it's logical that a longer distance is going to be more likely to be benefited by a low carb diet. However, having advised some elite athletes, I know that they do still continue to require carbohydrates during the race. And one athlete who I helped beat the South African ultramarathon record, ultra triathlon, the Ironman record, he still took 50 grams of carbs every hour for 8 hours that he was in the Ironman. So he took in 400 grams. But to me, 400 grams is neither here nor there, because he's pretty insulin sensitive and he can cope with it. So I don't have a problem with people taking carbohydrates during the race. They're going to burn it up and it may be helpful. And glucose clearly has a brain effect, and that might be the way it is. So, but I still think it's better to get by without if you can. So I would advise that JC first continues as she is and slowly reduces her dependence on the carbohydrates during the races and see what happens.
Okay.
We, in fact, did study one athlete who came to us and he said, I'm a 100K cyclist. Do I need carbs? He's fully adapted to the low carb diet. And we tested him and we found that carbohydrates helped him over 20Ks and hindered him over 100Ks. So it was really interesting.
That's interesting. Wow.
So that's kind of logical, because the shorter distance, you maybe need more carbs. But, he was able to get 90% of his energy from fat. He was basically not burning carbohydrates during the 100K.
Wow.
So he had so little need for carbohydrates. Yeah.
I've also heard...
So my bias, and then let me just say that we did a clinical trial in America with a group of scientists. Philip Prince was the senior author from Grove College in Pennsylvania. Fabulous study. 5K time trials. We did plenty of them, first on the low carb and then on the high carb diets. It was randomized. It was controlled brilliantly. Mm-hmm. So these people were running 5Ks in under 20 minutes. So they were 4-minute K runners. They're way better than average. And there was no benefit. There was nothing that we could detect the difference between the high carb and the low carb diets. And they were better than 88% of all the runners in the United States. So the advice for 88% of runners is you don't need to worry about your diet. You eat high fat, high carbs, whatever. You just eat it and you'll be fine.
Isn't it true as well that Steve Finney talks about salt intake and actually being careful about that on a low carb diet, because you are flushing out more liquids and you hold more with carbs, that actually the electrolytes management is very important, isn't it? And that can affect performance.
Yeah, that's correct. And that's a good point. That might not have been managed perfectly. Yes, you definitely need more salt and perhaps more magnesium as well.
Yeah. Okay, Heidi Bannister, who's the last one. And by the way, to let you know that we have my Facebook community and I do a fast once a quarter. So Heidi did, I think, about 7 days last time. We normally do about 5 days. I think she did a bit over. And we call ourselves the Wolf Pack. Very macho, isn't it? But we we have a Zoom call every evening. We all support each other, and then we go on the fast as a group, which actually I think is how tribal societies would have done it in the past anyway. We'd all supported each other through hard times. But Heidi Bannister's got a question for you, which is to do with low carb, but also fasting. She says, I love real food, low carb, and intermittent fasting. It seems to really suit me. No hunger, no cravings. But I'm curious to know if he thinks people can live a healthy high carb, or is this really the best way for everyone? So is everyone suited for this, or is it just certain people? Also, if he thinks that extended fasting for 5 to 7 days is any more beneficial than 16 hours of fasting, or 24, 36, or 42 hours consistently. So, what do you think about the fasting situation as well?
Okay, I won't pass an opinion because I haven't really looked at the science enough over 7 days fasting. I don't know what the long-term consequences of doing that are. It would worry me that you are cutting your calories And obviously you're burning fat, but are you getting the minerals in and so on and so forth? And how do you make that up with thereafter? So I'm just not an expert on that. But for 16 hours a day, I think that's ideal. So short-term fasting, I think, is absolutely valuable. I need to be convinced by the evidence that fasting for more than 16 hours is going to be beneficial. I simply haven't looked at the literature. But Jason Fung, I have a lot of faith in Jason Fung and Megan Ramos, and I know that they both promote longer term fasting, and that may well be important. And one of my friends now a friend, diagnosed cancer, fasted 7 days, and the cancer shrunk. And
Really? Wow.
yeah, it did. It literally shrank, and he's written a book. But anyway, he was amazed that he reversed his cancer with therapy but with the diet. So there may well be a role for prolonged fasting in certain conditions, but I just need to see the literature to know whether for the healthy people it would be ideal.
That's amazing.
So that's the first point. The second point was, is a high carbohydrate diet.
Is it suitable for everyone?
If you only ate a high carbohydrate diet and you were not insulin resistant and you ate no sugar and no processed foods, so it was mainly a vegetarian type diet, you might be okay, but you've got to have your meat as well. So in other words, it's low carb with meat. I couldn't see that. I would never promote a high carbohydrate diet, because as soon as you talk high carbs, you're talking ultra processed foods, sugar, and those are the problems. And all these ultra processed stuff, which is just not good. You have to eat real foods, and that comes back to animal produce.
Yeah.
And those people will be the healthiest. I've absolutely no doubt about it. I've looked at all the literature, historical literature, all the population studies. The Indian people living in India is really interesting, because they were the first that were really studied in detail by a guy called Robert McCarrison. And he noticed that the Indian people living in the north were the healthiest, and they were brilliantly healthy people. As you went south, the rice and wheat consumption increased, and the people were different and they were less healthy. So that was, and then he amazingly in the 1930s, he fed albino rats the diets of the 7 different major populations in India. And he could reproduce all the conditions in the rats that they were described in the humans.
Wow.
So the only ones who were really healthy were the ones who included meat in their diets.
So I just want to say, so you could be fairly healthy on a high carb diet, but the chances are much less likely and for far fewer people.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you better make sure your parents didn't have diabetes, because it's very clear. And Gary Taubes makes that very clear in this book, that amongst the Pima Indians went from being very healthy to very sick within 2 generations. And it's clear that as soon as you introduce sugar and refined carbohydrates to mothers in pregnancy, they then pre-program those children to be obese and diabetic in the next generation. And then that goes to the next generation. And that's why it takes so little time to go from a population that's healthy to be unhealthy. It's those epigenetic effects that you pass on to your children.
Wow, incredible. I just want to say a massive thank you to some other people who asked some questions, and that's Maria Gibb, Chris Malone, Gillian Fisk, and Susan Farley. I'm so sorry I didn't get to go all the questions, but very much appreciate that you asked them, guys. And I know I've kept him talking for such a long time. But I just want to tell you a quick story, if I may. So I was at a children's party last Saturday with my neighbours, and I'll see if you can guess in a minute this bit, but I spoke to my neighbours about not eating bread. And at this party, there's lots of bread there. Can you guess their nationality when I tell you their answer? They were horrified that anyone would not eat bread, because as far as they're concerned, it's a way of life. Can you guess which country they may be from?
Well, the Middle East, where the Persians would be the most.
They're Iranian.
Yeah,
they're Iranian. Yes. And so and my wife is Arab from Iraq, but of course, very different history. And I said to them, about not eating bread. And I said, well, to be honest, my ancestors were living on top of ice like 10,000 years ago. Yours were eating grains and wheats already. That's
Exactly.
probably why. And they just said, yeah, you don't have bread,
No.
But I think most people are like that. There's an addiction to this as well, which I think,
Absolutely.
even though we didn't go into that, I think that's another topic of discussion, because clearly wheat addiction, sugar addiction are real things. And that is also fueling a lot of the carb industry, isn't it? This addictive
Absolutely.
quality.
Now, the addiction drives it all. And that's why it's so difficult. And if you want to lose weight, you have to control the addiction. That's without it, you won't succeed.
Yeah.
And that's all our research shows, that the people who succeed are the ones who control the addictions.
I just want to say, Tim, thank you so much for today. I have had a hoot today. I've really enjoyed it. I didn't know exactly the nature of the conversation, but it's been really enjoyable for me. And also, I just want to say a personal thank you for everything you've done for me individually and for everyone else in the community. You didn't give up. You kept going throughout the trial and everything else, where you could have just said, that's it, I'm going to walk away. But you never did. So thank you so much for everything you do. And you're frozen. Did you hear that?
Yeah, I've heard enough of it.
Okay.
Well, thank you. It's so kind of you to say that. I really enjoyed it. And, you determine the outcome. It's not me who determines the outcome, because you set the questions and it's your vibrancy that comes through. So thank you very much. You made it special. And that's why I didn't notice a minute of it. And I see we've been doing this for an hour and 40 minutes. It feels like we only started 5 minutes ago. So it was a fabulous interview. Thank you. And that's a compliment to you. And not to me, it was you who drove it. So thank you so much.
Didn't I tell you at the beginning of this interview, he's the nicest guy ever? And there you go. You've got the proof there, even if he's a scouser. So, well, thank you, Tim. You take care, and look forward to The Law of Running coming out, where it's rewritten, and all the rest of your career ahead of you. I'm sure there's many great books coming out. So yeah, thank you. And thank you for being on UK Low Carb today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I loved every moment of it.